excited to talk to this person because I haven't seen him. I think it was back in April in Bali is when we first met. And then Mayumi was sweet enough to connect us, virtually. And then once I went out there, we sat down and, we chatted about co-living. And this guy definitely has experience in real estate, has experience in co-living and running a home. And so, let's just launch right into it. So go ahead and introduce yourself and tell everybody what you're up to.
Cool. My name's Kyron Gosse, originally from New Zealand, where I'm a property investor, but the goal was always to do property to be able to pay me to go traveling. So I started traveling, I lived in the Netherlands for 10 months with a Dutch girlfriend, and then we started traveling the world with a group that would take us from city to city. We didn't last too long with that, didn't really like it, but we're like, what if instead of having the entire group going from place to place each time, what if we had the different places where the people could come to? And so that's kind of how I got involved in co-living. I didn't even know it was called co-living back then. All I wanted was to set up a place where I could have awesome people come, stay for a while, and then go to the next place. And so set up in Bali, where I did my first attempt at co-living, I guess I'd call it.
And that was how long, was that like a year and a half ago? How long ago was that?
What are we now? 2018. It was the start of, I took over January 2017.
Okay, cool. And then talk a little bit, we don't want to scare people, but because everybody comes to us and Kndrd was contemplating doing Bali. And I loved it there. It's beautiful. But tell me about the authorities and, you have to pay off people to have parties. And, did you say it was just super corrupt?
It's different. It's definitely different. So I don't think Bali was the right place to get started. Obviously, with co-living and with a lot of that sort of thing, people usually pay the premium because they want to be living amongst other entrepreneurs, other like-minded people, and they have everything provided for them. But Bali's so cheap anyway, and the locals would be happy to make $100, $200 extra per month, which for us, it wouldn't be even worth it. I mean, I was spending $100 a month on coconuts alone. And so it made it really difficult. And then it wasn't until after I'd signed up for a year-long lease, where in Bali, you pay the year in advance. So you're dropping $30,000 to $50,000 on a property before you've even filled it. And then having to buy all the furniture, the sheets, the knives, spoons, that sort of thing. But given it's in Southeast Asia, and Southeast Asia is renowned for I wouldn't quite say corruption. There is obviously corruption there, but it's just a different way of operating. So in Bali, they have little villages, which are called banjars, and the banjar is kind of like the local council. But in New Zealand and America and, in normal Western countries, the council have these rules that you could go onto a website and how all the rules work, right? And if you don't follow them, the council could still come in and take your house, blah, blah, blah. But over there, you don't know what the rules are, and it's different from banjar to banjar. So, for example, even down to how much you pay for your rubbish. I was paying $15 a month, which I thought was relatively cheap. And then another friend's like, you're paying too much. I only pay $3 per month. I'm like, well, who really cares? But like you're saying with the parties, we'd have a party and they'd be like, oh, you didn't tell us about the party. And I'm like, well, why would I? And they're like, well, you have a party, you have to pay us. I'm like, what am I paying you for? They're like, for us to come and do security and for parking. I'm like, well, I don't need you to park the cars, or the motorbikes. People know how to park motorbikes. I've got staff. They can help with the motorbike parking. And so, so the very first party I did, that was a complete screw up. I paid 2 million rupiah, which is about $150 US, I think. And I only had 7 people come because everybody sees all the banjar there sitting there, looking all authority-wise and little red flashing lights. And we're like, yeah, no, we're not going to go. And they turn around. So I paid $150 for 7 people to come. And it was this big joke. So we stopped telling them. And because where we were, no one really noticed. But then a little restaurant opened up across the road, and that was where the banjar used to hang out. So if we did anything, they would always know. It's a really interesting concept. Some people liken them to the mafia, but yeah, there's so many different rules. Like the local council could stop the police from coming in. If they don't like you, they can make your life hell. So I made it my mission right at the start when I first met them to be friendly. I said, hey, I want to be part of the community, but I'm obviously not Hindu, so I'm not going to be sitting there giving tons of money towards all the festivals and stuff. But I don't want to be treated just like a rich Westerner who's come in and be taken advantage of, which I'm not sure worked.
So now fast forward to now you went back to New Zealand, right? And you guys tell everybody what your new project is. This is super exciting.
So I took everything I learned from Bali. I absolutely loved it. I could never make it work. I could never make it financially viable, but I absolutely loved it. I loved that concept of just having amazing people coming and staying in the house who are always on different projects, so you could sit down over breakfast and talk about it. And I was like, how do we take this to the next level? And one thing I realized, one of the big problems with Bali is it's so transient. People would come for 1 month, 2 months, and you'd always be trying to fill rooms. And I think I worked out I'd ideally rather be in a place where you'd have more permanent people, people who are going to stay there a year, 2 years, that sort of thing. But an interesting that came out of Bali is I met a friend. She came and stayed in my property actually, and we became good friends. We started working together, and then she was building a tiny house in Belgium. And I was like, that's really cool. I was like, I've always wanted to do these little entrepreneurial villages. Imagine a tiny house village. And so that's now what we're working on in New Zealand. We've got the building for our own tiny house. We're going to be tiny flatmates. So that's happening right now. We managed to get funding pretty quickly. Like, you know, if you want to talk about flow, it all just happened. We pitched one investor. We got the money to build it. We got the land to put the property on. My parents own an amazing piece of land right on a riverfront, 2 minutes kayak to a waterfall. And when we went and looked at the council, we realized we could fit about 20 tiny houses on there. And it's it's this amazing location where there's a lot of early retirees go to. And I was like, this would be a really good place for lifestyle entrepreneurs, not digital nomads, but lifestyle entrepreneurs, people who want to escape the hustle and bustle, can work online or run their business. It's only 2.5 hours to Auckland. So if you have to go to the big city every now and then, it's not too much of a mission. But just to escape, to have this amazing community around them, to be able to build their business, because the last thing I want is to end up with a trailer park where everyone's sitting around, like, you know, not doing anything. Like for me, I get really inspired by people who have projects, who are out there living their life. So that's what we're working on now.
And so like go into a little more detail about, in your opinion, you know, digital nomad versus lifestyle entrepreneur. Like, what's the difference in your opinion?
I think the big thing, I'm going to get a lot of hate.
I know, that's why I'm making you answer this question, not me.
I've always spoken out a little bit against digital nomads. If you look at most digital nomads, most of them aren't making money. A lot of them are either living off savings, or they're moving somewhere like Bali because it's cheap. But I think there's a difference between moving somewhere simply because it's cheap. Like, you jump on the digital nomad groups and they're like, where can I live for $600 per month? And it's like, why limit yourself to that? Why not say, you know, if you're a real entrepreneur, you'd say, actually, I love this place. Like, you're in Silicon Valley, right?
No, I'm down in Los Angeles.
Okay. Oh, cool.
No, that's what they call it now. I'm not just making that up. Playa Vista is now Silicon Beach because the Silicon Valley is getting too crowded, so they're moving all the tech here to West Los Angeles. Yeah, it's really cool. And then you have the beach and you have better weather.
So if it's an amazing place like that, why wouldn't you say, okay, what do I have to do in order to earn enough money to go live in Silicon Beach? Yeah. Rather than being like, oh, I only know how to make $600 a month. I'm going to go live in some shitty area where I can only afford to live for $600 a month and make the best out of it. So I think that's the biggest difference between digital nomads and lifestyle entrepreneurs. The other is a lot of digital nomads, I feel, are just ticking countries off. they're just traveling for travel's sake. I found it really difficult to build my business when I was constantly traveling, and I was so happy when I found somewhere and I could just settle down and have a base, and I'd still travel, but I'd have somewhere to call home.
No, and I think you're right. And I think it's almost for just the Instagram shots, right? Oh, I'm in this country, I'm in that country, I'm on this. And it's exhausting for them because a lot of them behind the scenes, it gets very isolating and exhausting, they've told me. I've known people that have jumped. They'll jump every 2 weeks for a year. But you don't make connections when people know you're only there for 2 weeks. It's hard to get a deep connection. So that's interesting.
Well, we actually had that in the end in Bali, because we ended up with a group of 5 to 10 of us who were semi-permanent. We're going to be in Bali, like 6 months is what it takes to be semi-permanent, right? Yeah. And when you go out to a networking group, you're like, oh, really? We got to do all this again? Or you go out to, just a social gathering, and it's like, oh, really? How long are you here for? And if someone said, I'm here for a month, you probably almost wouldn't bother talking to them because it wasn't going to be of any benefit to you. A month later, you're going to be talking to somebody else.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. And then I love, so your kind of title, I don't know if it's a title, but futurist. So I love that because you think like, okay, where are we heading? Like these tiny homes on a plot of land, it's still community and they still have their privacy. I think that's amazing. When are you guys going to officially open up?
So the plan for this year is to get our first tiny house to test it. So you're speaking of futurist. It's going to be a tiny, smart, passive house. So we're installing smart systems. So if it gets too hot, it will open the window automatically. As it starts getting later at night, it'll start dimming down the lights. It'll be keyless entry, all these sorts of things. So it's like,
very cool.
It's essentially it's a show home for me. I wrote the book Future of Property, which was talking about all the different trends and technologies which were coming into place, and now this is a chance for me to actually show people what that looks like. And I talk a little bit about the convergence, which is when, okay, you have tiny houses, you have smart homes, and you have co-living. But what happens when you combine them all together and you have something that's never been there before? And for me, that's what's most exciting about everything we're doing now.
Oh, I love it, Kyron. No, that's why I told them before the start, I'm like, I'm so excited to talk to you again. Just because it's like, well, they're just saying that the pioneers get all the arrows in the back. You know what I mean? So being a futurist and trying to, jumpstart a trend or just, you see it. And I believe that it's for sure going in that direction, but it's like, okay, we're just going to go and figure it out. We're definitely going to get some arrows in the back on the way, but I love that. I believe wholeheartedly in that. And especially the smart home stuff too, because that comes to our last home had some amazing technology tied into it. And it was really beneficial for everybody living there. Everything was on an app. It was crazy. We could heat the jacuzzi up, the pool. We could turn lights on or off, the air. Like everything was on an app. And it was like, how cool would this be if we had this at every house?
Exactly.
Same thing. So that's really cool. So let me see. So some of my questions, because mine are more tailored because I know what you're doing is so unique. Let's see here. What average age do you think are going to be, in those homes?
That's a really interesting question. In Bali, I would have said between 25 and 35. Mm-hmm. My target market is still that sort of thing. It's essentially people who they get a massive student loan, go to university, come out of it, go get the job. They get the job to pay off their student loan, but they got to live close to their job, so they got to pay really high rent in order to just go for the job. And it's this vicious cycle, right? And it's like, what if you could break away from all that? The tiny house mortgage is going to be less than $100,000. To have this sweet pad that's an actual asset that if you wanted, you could just travel the country, come back. The goal is to eventually have different villages, 10 villages around New Zealand. So you could go from our one in Auckland down to our one in Wellington and live there for 6 months. That's what the eventual goal is. But that's really who it is. It's about getting people away from getting a massive student loan, going into a job that they hate and becoming what I call a corporate zombie. It's about how do you actually find your passion, follow your passion? How do you find your purpose, and how do you tie it all in together so that you're not, doing the Monday to Friday, go to your work, come home, sit in traffic, watch TV, veg out until you have to get up in the next morning and sit in traffic to go to your job. Because when people come alive and they like find something that they love, it's like a crusade, right? When they find a crusade that they're willing to stand up for, fight for, and drive, like, it doesn't matter what it is. You can see the passion in someone's eyes, and it inspires everyone.
Oh my gosh, I love that. And then where are you staying at? So you're back in New Zealand now, and where do you live? Who do you live with now? Do you have like any co-living situation you're doing right now? Or?
Well, this is funny because I was only supposed to be coming back for 2 months. I came back just to see what was happening in the property market. I make most of my money through property investing still. So I came back to see what was happening. And then, like I said, just everything fell into place. The tiny house stuff fell into place. The investing has all fallen into place. And I was like, I got to figure everything out. We were booking flights back to Bali, and I was like, what am I even going back to Bali for? My lease is up. I'd literally be flying there to pick up some clothes I left there, which are worth less than $300, and the flight would be $1,000. And so right now, I'm just staying in a friend's place. I'm house sitting. She went to America for a month. I was like, that's perfect. I'll stay, look after your place. So there's going to be about a month in between when she comes back and the tiny house is finished. So I'll be doing a bit of couch surfing. Or I do have a friend. He doesn't quite run co-living spaces as we would know them, but he does have a couple of investment properties that he rents out to buy the room. So I could potentially go into that sort of situation.
I love that. And then so that's kind of your future. That's what's going on with what you're doing, which is super exciting. How do you see, my last question with every interview is, where do you see the industry of co-living in general? Like, where do you see that going?
I think we're right at the start of it. So co-living fits into what I'd call housing as a service. So obviously we started off with software as a service. When things like Uber came along, we've got transport as a service. We're definitely moving into a space where it's housing as a service, because there are a lot of people out there, and it's right at the start, right? Where people are like, you know what? I don't need to buy a house. I don't even, like, personally, I've never wanted to own my own home. I've bought hundreds of properties, but I've never ever bought my own home. So this tiny house will be my first ever home. And the problem is, like, if you buy a home, you're stuck with it.
Yeah.
So I think we're right at the cusp of housing as a service. Airbnb started a lot of that. Co-living is taking it to the next level. And we're going to start to see a few different things. Co-living can be broken down into like a domestic market where it's mainly people from that country, like in America, right? The co-living industry in America is predominantly Americans co-living in a property with other Americans. Whereas when you look at the more traditional nomad hotspots, they're travelers. So you've got the domestic market and you've got the foreign market. So we're going to see different things happening within both sides of it. But I think we're going to start to see alliances forming, and you've obviously talked to the Co-Living Hub, the guys from there, or you will be?
Yeah, I will be, yeah.
Yeah. So I helped start that conversation. But like, where suddenly rules are forming, what does co-living even entail? What are the basic standards that other people are going to have to meet if you come up to it? And much like we had in the backpacker or hostel industry, where you'd have all the little independents, which would then form under one sort of alliance so that they could get more business, they could set the standards, and people would know what they'd be coming into. I think we'll start to see a lot of that happening. The big thing about co-living is there's no real barrier to entry. So I think we'll see a lot of co-living spaces pop up fast once someone gets that particular model right.
Yeah. And then on that point, there isn't, and I haven't checked in the last month, is there an association yet for co-living or no? I know there's a few working.
Not that I know of.
Okay.
I'd say Co-Living Hub are the closest to that.
Yeah. What's that?
I'd say Co-Living Hub are the closest to an association.
Okay. Yeah, you're right. Cool. Well, good stuff. I really appreciate your time. This was an awesome conversation. Like, we always have such great, I mean, you just, I love the way you think, and it's exciting. And I can't wait for us to follow along, and definitely keep us updated. But thank you for your time on this interview.
That's all right. I'll let you go. You've probably got 5 minutes till the next one.
I know, right? I'm like back to back. Thanks
Cool.
so much. Have a great rest of your day.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye.